In today's episode, I discuss the Jordenheim role-playing game with designer Dan Cross.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show, or just the Dice Geeks podcast. Now, my name is Matt Davids. I am the author of the Books of Random Tables, as well as other RPG resource books that help game masters cut down their prep time. If you want to check those out, you can head over to DiceGeeks.com, Amazon.com, or DriveThruRPG.com. Just search for Dice Geeks. You will find me, or simply just type in the Book of Random Tables. You know, guys, I've been doing this show for a while now, actually over a year now, which kind of just blows my mind. I do just want to thank all my regular listeners for tuning in each and every week. It has been an exciting journey being able to talk to so many fascinating people and interview them for the podcast. It is a ton of work, though, trying to get these episodes out each and every Wednesday. If you want to support the show in some way, you can leave a review, you can rate the show, you can share it with your friends. If you want to support the show financially, you can do so on Patreon. It is just patreon.com/dicegeeks. Any support is greatly appreciated. And so now today I have another exciting episode for you. Let's jump in. My guest today is the lead designer behind the Jordenheim role-playing game from W.R.K.S Games, Dan Cross. Dan, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
I like to ask first-time guests, when were you first introduced to tabletop role-playing games?
Well, it was a people, and they came into my house in the night and they stole me out and forced me to read these esoteric grimoires. No, I'm kidding. No, I was about 10 years old, and my oldest friend, well, he's not oldest really, but the friend I've known the longest since kindergarten, he introduced me to the game. And it's, I think, like so many other stories, he introduced me to the idea of a collaborative narrative, and it just lit my imagination on fire there, and gave me an excuse to play with action figures pretty much after the age of 12 without feeling embarrassed.
Yeah, I had a similar experience, yes. What game did you play, by the way?
A basic set, Dungeons and Dragons. It was actually, I think it was the Earl Otis, if I'm pronouncing that right, the artwork before the more famous Larry Elmore Red Dragon box set cover of the basic set. So yeah, it was probably around 82, 83.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Did it have a green dragon on a red cover, I think?
That was the companion set. That was the second set in the series. So okay. I did own that one too, but man, those were exciting to open those boxes and read through that initial, what was Bargle, I think was the bad guy's name in that.
Oh yeah, I don't know. I can't remember.
I was boggled by Bargle. But, yeah, and then it just took off. I mean, there's no comparison to that game in terms of potential and the friends you can make. It really defines so many people's lives, and of course, it pretty much became the blueprint for just about every game of its kind in video games alike.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I had a similar experience because it was about 1982 when I first played, and I was 9. And we played the basic rules as well. It is one of those things where it just like the course of my life changed because of a game. And it's just kind of strange. That's the way it goes.
I also learned there. Yeah, it's, you learn a lot about life, like, don't try and negotiate with kobolds, those kinds of things, essential life lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, never negotiate with a kobold. And then did you, I assume then you didn't stick with D&D, you kind of branched out into some other games?
Well, the friends of my friend Greg, who had introduced me to the game during the high school years, they enjoyed Kevin Symbiota's riffs and games. So I know I enjoyed those very much too. Playing superheroes and getting killed a lot, even after spending 4 hours on my first character.
Yeah, like Heroes Unlimited.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it took me like, I don't know, maybe a week to create my first character. That was, but yes, then they die and you're just like, oh man.
So I think, that was probably my version of team hazing in the social group, let's play riffs. But I mean, I love the worlds. That whole concept too of multi-genre is something that's always appealed to me. So I also, the generic universal role-playing system from Steve Jackson Games, and probably read Torg, but never got a chance to play it. So sad, it happens all the time.
Yeah, a lot of good games there, and of course, yes, I have read many more than I've gotten to play. Sadly, yes.
I mean, I think we all have that in common as artists.
Yeah,
it's like one day I'll play this. I swear.
Yeah, no kidding. I know. I keep saying I'm going to get a session in of Ashen Stars in the Gumshoe system, but it just, I don't know, it just keeps getting put off. But hopefully before 2020 is over, I don't know, we'll see.
Gumshoe, I love stuff. He wrote one of the best books on GMing I've read too. I think his ideas, they were incorporated into the later editions of D&D too, with different advice on player types and campaign types and how to appeal to players. I love his stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've interviewed Robin here on the podcast. It just hasn't aired as we're recording this one right now, but it will have aired by the time people are listening to this one. Yeah, so hopefully I will get to play that here soon.
Awesome.
A lot of people may play Dungeons and Dragons or some other games when they're young, but then they move on and they become an accountant or a plumber or something. Why then did you become a game designer?
Well, I think over time, every dungeon master, game master, whatever they call themselves, they start to get an idea of the kind of style of play that they enjoy most. And so with limited resources, we'll gravitate toward one sort of system over another, rules light versus rules heavy, or simulationist versus narrative, whatever. And of course I had my preferences, as did some of my more usual players. And one day one of my friends came up, and his name was Randy Petras, and he said, and I help you out with that. And he was a computer programmer, math guy, and I was definitely interested in the fiddly bits of games and different ways to approach how they actually feel in actual play. And my answer to him was, oh God, no way, man. My poor players and friends coming over and seeing a pile of paper, and I have to tell them, we're going to play test these rules. And they're like, oh God, can't we just play what we already purchased? But he hammered on me. And I gave in eventually. And started to think, and I was reading a book I think it was edited by Steve Winter, and I think it was Critical, and it came out in the late 90s. I think it was late 90s. And this was long before I heard of games like Savage Worlds or Cortex or others that use the die ranks, like from the attributes or abilities that are ranked from the D4 up through the D12. But this game, Immortal, it was innovative. And I was reading through that when it suddenly hit me, I really liked having each die represent different levels of power, whether it be an attribute or an individual, just in broad concept. So I thought, well, what if I designed around the idea that like these two D4s were two distinct individual people and they were going to go at it with each other, and looking at the table, having D4s battling each other or something. But I mean, as far as, attack potential and defense, 4 hit points and 1 to 4 points of damage, so equal in strength. So I went from there, and it kind of blossomed from that generative idea. And that was a long time ago. For the next 8 years, we fleshed it out just a little bit. And I eventually took it to a company called Sylvan Publishing, which was owned and run by Kosala, or my friend Kos, who is now running the W.R.K.S games company based out of London, and that is role-playing games for the video game world. And back then he was doing exclusively publishing for role-playing games. I think he was publishing through custom prints of Mongoose. And that was probably before Drive-Thru RPG became as well known. And I showed him, and I said, I think this might be a good idea. Well, by then, I had also worked with Gary Gygax and Troll Lord Games. And I co-authored a book called World Builder with Gary Gygax. So I had that amount of street cred to talk to somebody. It's like Gary handed me a card, just give him this card and he'll talk to you. No, it didn't work like that at all. But anyway, he had interviewed me because I had worked with Gary, and much like actually not like I am right now, because it was a text interview, not a podcast. But we started to talk about work on the idea together, and he decided, he was going to move on to other project management things at the time, but he helped me and carried me through to get the idea proposed to Goodman Games in 2008. And the Eldritch RPG was published a short run through them right before the so it was kind of rushed. So we put it out there, and then a few years later, after the signal to noise ratio drowned out everything else, and if you don't sell the IP to a company, chances are they're not going to put a whole lot of money into support. I decided to run a Kickstarter and do a revised edition in 2013, which was successful. So that's the history of that. Well, then more recently, Casala had come out of hiding, emerging from the world of app programming and such, to work on to make the Blood Bond video game. And I was impressed with what that looked like. And I love the Norse world and mythology, as does he. And we struck up a conversation about the evolution of the Eldritch role-playing game, which was very, very much focused on the narrative, because my play style is more rules-light. And he agreed to use my game system as the basis for that, which is now in the process of being made multi-genre. And I call it the polyphony system underlying that. But the Jordenheim RPG a reflection of the world that he has envisioned. And it's been a lot of fun to write. We spent over a year on it. And the artwork and everything, he has drawn in talent from the video game industry, including one, I forget her name now. That's shameful. But she worked for In Exile, which is one of my favorite video game companies. You may have heard of them, Wasteland, Bard's Tale, all that. So that alone was exciting to do that. So it's all coming together now.
And before we kind of dive into Jordenheim a little bit more, I wanted to kind of follow up on a few things because you had a lot there. But it is interesting to hear you talk about, game design and some of the different mechanics in that. What are some misconceptions that you hear about game design other than, mentioning that it's like a secret cabal where you need to be handed like a secret entry card from the Grandmasters?
Misconceptions of game design. Well, I don't know if there's a misconception that it's easy. I don't think I've ever heard that one. Although there's always somebody out there who says, a monkey could make that. There's always that person. And for them, I will see if I can find them a zoo and 100 typewriters and see what they can do with it. And I know that also, for example, half the difficulty of game design is the balance between not reinventing the wheel, having some sense of familiarity, drawing on the material that you have absorbed, standing on the shoulders of giants, remembering to be somewhat humble about that, because much of it is derivative and inspired work. So I don't personally have too much of an ego about it. But I think that if someone aspires to be a designer, I would look first and foremost just at your circle of friends and what they like to have a long-standing cohesive player group where everybody is sort of on the same page and of the same spirit and intent, then if they're willing, you can start to tweak the rules or make new rules that reflect your own style. And that's really where it came from for me, because we all decided that there were certain ways that suit our group better. But I always hated the edition wars. This is true game design. This game is the way it ought to be. Well, no, I think most of us know at this point that it's pretty much more like, whatever form of fun you like is the right one. The other branch of that is when someone starts to think, how can I be competitive in this market, especially when I'm thinking about a genre that is so saturated, where you have excellent games that are in preponderance, and that once somebody is invested in one, how do you compete? That makes it unique and makes it worth even the time invested to create something that's considered, personal IP in that case. And that's just the test of time, really. I mean, I got a lot of encouragement as I went along from my friends and others who said, it's really difficult to see it on paper. It's, for example, in Dungeons and Dragons, and this is not a criticism, but this basically at the core hit in this system, and narrative combat is a lot of fun, and a lot of dungeon masters can do it extremely well, as can the players. But for some, or maybe those as the gift of gab, or maybe a little bit more literalistic, it's like I would describe something where I'm striking the foe, or the character, and describe it as a hit, quote unquote, and they might be confused about results and so on. If someone takes something not abstractly, well, then some of these warriors are like as hardy as 5 war horses put together. So I don't think there's too many players or DMs who are not comfortable with the idea of the abstract in games, but I mean, still what it comes up.
Yeah. I did think
misconception is that there's one right way to play. That's the misconception. Then there's not, or that there's one right design. I don't, because otherwise, why would people be arguing about it? I guess that's my answer. There you go.
No, that's great. I think absolutely, yeah. There's one type of game design that is better than all others is certainly a big one that you hear sometimes. And when people just what they mean is that they prefer playing this one game or this one system, and you're just like, well, that's fine. I think your point though about having like a consistent group who's like playing your stuff and who's willing to like play your stuff. I think that was an interesting point that I hadn't really pulled out before or hadn't really thought about too much before, but that kind of does seem where like even some campaign settings or, different games come from is just that somebody, some game master was running for a group of their friends and they've started kind of changing and evolving kind of down through, a few years or for a decade or so. And then they're like, well, I have something that's brand new and could be its own game or something like that.
Right. You have to have some enthusiastic support and friends who aren't afraid to tell you the truth. And that's not to say that one person's opinion should matter or that your design by committee is the best way. It's not always, although I'd say that the hundreds of thousands of people that were playtesting 5th edition proved that it's not always a bad idea to do it that way. But the Eldritch RPG, polyphony, whatever, the multi-genre, the whole thing as it's evolving is very much my vision and my way of playing, which is, I call it design by semantics. So rather than to say, to hit, to miss, I say roll for your potential harm. And instead of opposed rolls for dodging as you would have in some systems, which can be somewhat endless, I just have provided different active defense pools, depending on the genre or the customization, how many that is, depends. But it's directly derived from the abilities of the characters. So simplicity in play, not forcing a player to how they defend themselves in minute detail, but to choose their form of defense out of a number of options that actually have a pool of abstract hit points, I thought was a good way to encourage narrative in combat and encourage people to excitedly say, okay, this is what I'm doing. And for some, it just came naturally anyway, regardless of it. But it's something where it actually, nudged people toward that kind of thinking.
And thank you for kind of explaining that. That is interesting. Obviously a lot of people who listen to the podcast are not game designers. They're game masters. Since you have run so many games, do you have like maybe one or two pieces of game master advice that you just always want people to kind of understand?
Yes. And it's very much with books like The Lazy Dungeon Master from Sly Flourish. It's basically be comfortable with improvisation. You are not telling your players a predefined story. And a lot of DMs, even though they know it objectively, they still will drag there's a plot where the NPCs tend to rival them or overpower them just for the sake of plot points. And that's almost like number one sin of GMs. So it's almost too obvious to state.
Yeah.
But so the other advice for that is to know your players. And my players are my friends. Unless I'm sitting down at a convention or doing some random online Roll20 demo, I'm going to get to know what their preferences are. And some books like The Lazy Dungeon Master goes over that extremely well. Get to know each character and their player, and you can start to build the stones, all of their imaginations, because that's a treasure trove right there, the minds of your players, even in session. I mean, how many game masters or dungeon masters have had that, sly smile as they're listening to their players come up with all kinds of different theories about what could be going on in the story. And then the dungeon master secretly and just going on because he likes the player's ideas better.
Yeah, absolutely. I do that all the time.
Right.
Yep.
It's natural, but it's also done in a way where it's not meant to thwart the players. And I think that's also the part where the game itself comes in. The reason we have dice and the randomization is if it simply fight, if it was just trying to outwit each other, then I guess it would just be a more adult form of cops and robbers or something, I
do think that becoming comfortable with improvisation is incredibly important. Do you have a strategy how some people can become a little bit more comfortable with that? I usually say play a whole bunch, play a lot, and you will. But do you have, some people are just like, oh, well, I can't think of something kind of off the fly like that. But do you have a tip for helping improvisation?
Yes. The longest time, my advice was just the same as yours, and it still is that advice too. But there was something that came up in the last few years that surprised me. And that was the success of all of the online games that people watch, Critical Role. And for the longest time, I thought, oh, man, who would want to just sit down and watch? Well, I was really wrong about that.
Yeah, me too.
It's like, oh, well, okay, I hadn't considered professional voice actors. And so, I mean, it's amazing what they've accomplished in bringing new blood into the hobby, the gateway still being the Dungeons and Dragons, I must say. I think that's probably still the gateway. But when you have someone like Matt Mercer talking to Stephen Colbert, you know that this sort of form of observing other people play is working to get people interested.
Yeah.
And so I'd recommend that. If you don't have someone who's local you can sit and play with and learn from, then watch the best, because now they're all available, many of them, whether it's on D&D Beyond or other games demos too. If you're interested in a new game system, because there's plenty of those, sites like Roll20 go on. There's all kinds of games that are ad hoc and inviting players. There's no better way to learn a system or how to GM than to just join one of those, especially COVID times. If you're sitting inside, we'll play again.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you did bring up, like Critical Role and things. And of course, yes, you can watch, now people run games and all different kinds of games and listen to them and see their strategies and that you're kind of continuing a trend here. Most of, myself and most of the people that I interview did not see people watching or listening to role-playing games, as a thing. We didn't see it coming. I just find it, just kind of just totally surprising still, because anytime, when I would be playing, years ago and somebody said they just wanted to come and watch, I would always be like, are you crazy? Like, play with us. Like, don't watch. Like, that's going to be boring. But
it's like almost creepy, Like,
yeah.
a spider on my wall? Are you judging me?
Yeah, like you're not in part of the fun. And I guess it's a little bit more creepy since they would be sitting at the table or in the same room and just listening instead of, watching a TV or a computer or something. But it just always seemed like, well, that's the boring part. Like, just watching's boring. Playing is fun. So why don't you just play with us? Right. But yeah, I certainly didn't see that coming. But yeah, when you can, I forget what their Kickstarter for an animated show was something, I forget the exact number, but it was in the millions of dollars. And it's just amazing, watching and listening what type of that content has done for the industry. I mean, it's just, and obviously the industry is just exploding with more and more people playing.
And I think like my players are collaborators, but those shows, they have an audience. My players aren't audiences. They're collaborators. Yeah. And so I think that was a difference. And it also depends on who's watching and why. So like, if Gary Gygax was, wanting to sit down and just watch me run his legendary adventure game back in 2000 or something, I think I might have been a little uncomfortable with that. You either run it or you're going to play, or I'm just going to faint. That kind of thing. But yeah, so I think that's why I'll be running demos for Jordenheim on Roll20 now and then. I know that there's an expo in August, and I can get more details to you when we have more of it nailed down. But that's I think if people like to watch, hey, watch me. Yeah, come and collaborate.
Yeah, and I'll definitely get some of that information. Although this episode probably won't premiere until after August. But
okay. Well, then you all missed it. Just kidding.
I'm sure there'll be more, and I'll try to put some links into the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com so people can find out where you're running some games and things like that. You have mentioned
what you missed.
Yeah. Yeah. Then they'll just be consigned to just be an audience member and they can't participate. Yes.
Although I didn't say it was going to be on Twitch, did I? So I might even be a liar. This is terrible. Terrible.
Well, wherever it is, we'll figure it out. I'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, I'll put some links in the show notes.
You're making a mess.
Yeah, I just find it interesting. And I guess that, like I said, I didn't see this coming, but maybe, I'm always looking at my gray hair wondering, maybe it's because I'm old, but, when you think of like Critical Role or something like that, you think of, a show now that has, a couple seasons with, I forget how many episodes, and they're all 4.5 hours long. And it's just like that people, will devour every single one of those. And it's just fascinating to me. And I think it's just a reflection on, just obviously how technology is changing things, how our society is changing, but also possibly even the changing nature of jobs in many cases where you can work for, say an e-commerce company or something like that, where you're creating an email for them and you can just listen to podcasts all day. And I just find that all fascinating.
Yeah, it's a lesson to me too. Don't get too comfortable with my own preconceived notions of what is or is not going to be entertaining. And so humility.
Yes. Yeah. Humility and the willingness to change and adapt to new technologies, because you could start playing your game online and it could blow up.
Right, which brings me back to some of the questions you were asking early on about game designers and what the pitfalls or difficulties are for that. And I thought back to that. It's like, well, what's the real differentiator? Well, players are your collaborators, and your enthusiastic supporters are your friends, hopefully, or even extending out beyond that. What makes for a successful designer is their own passion, enthusiasm, and willingness to engage. And that's one thing that Gary, who I was privileged to know and work with, was incredible about. The main time my emails faster than my own mother. I mean, he was really engaged with his fans, and it's, I think, a testament to who he was, because he treated me like anyone else. I was intimidated at first to meet him, kind of like a musician might be intimidated to meet David Bowie.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, who doesn't, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's to me a really important element of that. Like, I wanted the game that I've been creating, or in collaboration with Casala and W.R.K.S Games in Jordenheim, to be an evolving thing which engages people. Because I like that level of involvement. I don't want to just write a system, say this one's better than D&D, and then throw it out there and hope people just start buying, like, suddenly, for no reason other than I said so. I mean, that would be pretty magical too, I guess, but I mean, insidious too. I don't know how that would work. I would need some charm spell that works through the internet. No, that's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, now you've mentioned W.R.K.S Games a few times. Can you tell us a little bit more about W.R.K.S Games? Yeah,
they are a wonderful group of very talented people. I mentioned earlier some that Casala, the CEO, was and has been working with and continues to work with. A lot of them drawn from the video game industry. And I think anyone that takes a look at the Jordenheim RPG, jordenheim.com, and takes a look at that, will see just how talented these folks are. I just feel privileged to have had our collective vision, painted in such a way, literally. It's also a good place to work. And I say place, but it's all remote. He's in London, I'm in Florida, dodging hurricanes and stuff. But he's very forthright, and he pays well. I think the RPG industry is pretty famous for low pay, and so it's refreshing to work for someone who actually respects artists and doesn't want to exploit them.
Yeah. That's good. Yes.
So again, it comes down to camaraderie. It's especially a creative endeavor, and there's money involved. It really helps to have some integrity, and so that's another reason why I enjoyed working with them. I'm still a freelancer. I'm not a full-time employee, because they promote, for the most part, freelancers. Their Blood Bond video game is the first project, which is very new. The first chapter of it is in Steam, and it's based on the Unreal Engine, I believe. And it's featuring the young girl Astrid, who's an archer, and she's trying to unravel the mysteries of the world. It's like Elder Others. It's got that, but the world of Jordenheim, that's a topic unto itself. Actually, if I were to anticipate a question which you haven't asked, and I will, it's like what makes any of these game worlds so different either. Right. Mm-hmm. And well, Jordenheim, based on Norse myth. Myth spoke that word. And see, what makes the realm different is also the kind of stories that are told of the people and the background and history. It's all just, how do you say that? It's like, I'm gonna switch gears and say, like, if you watch Game of Thrones, what makes that unique? It's the characters in it. It's the history. It's it's the way it's written in the books. If you take all the tropes of any one of these worlds individually and just line them up, it all looks kind of the same. So I think the analogy between the uniqueness of a community and the uniqueness of the personalities and the artist talents, it's kind of like you can tell Larry Elmore from anything Earl Otis, right? But they're both really interesting and enjoyable. And so there's a lot of subtle inflection that's different about Jordenheim. There's the shrouded realm where all of the creatures of myth exist. In some of the regions, excuse me, some of the regions have more integrated existence with civilization and the creatures of the shroud and magic, and others are more, the xenophobic types, or the ones that are the witch hunters and that sort of thing, mostly in what was Denmark. You can see the analogies on the map. There's other worlds that are constructed in such a way to be like parallel Earths, different timeline where myth is real. So it's got that. Also, what's different is that, as I've been saying, the Eldritch role-playing game system Polyphony, that those system rules are very much designed to nudge people into a narrative. And so I designed this RPG to reflect the feel, the spirit of Jordenheim, which is difficult to describe outside of what sounds like the typical tropes. You have to experience it. You have to play it.
Why is that important to you to make combat feel narrative?
Well, I believe it's important to me, first, just because it's a personal preference. Mm-hmm. Unless you are playing a simulationist game with miniatures and the focus is on tactical battle, if you're one like myself who enjoys the theater of the mind style, then just rolling dice and declaring hit or miss and jotting down hit point reductions gets really fast. And so a system that's designed around action where it encourages narrative, to me, was very appealing. I think all the games have in common where if there's role-playing involved, the rules kind of fall away naturally most of the time, unless they have intricate social interaction rules. And a lot of them don't. They focus on combat because those are the areas where the action takes a turn where you can't be arbitrary lest your players get up from the table in frustration and walk out on you because you just dropped anvils out of the sky.
You've been talking about Jordenheim here, and I think you mentioned a little bit about being Norse kind of inspired. What is the appeal to you about setting a game in kind of the Viking kind of Norse world and mythology?
I like all mythology. So I think that setting in something that's inspired by Norse mythology would be just as exciting as basing it on Greek, and probably easier than basing it on one that I'm not familiar with at all, like, African mythologies. Kudos to anyone who tackles that kind of thing. So there's part of it's just, I think, our collective cultural myth heritage too. A lot of us in the United States anyway, where these are thoughts, images, mythological motifs that have worked their ways into our language and calendars in ways that most aren't even aware. Wednesday having to do with Odin and just how it breaks down in language. It's a rich mythology, like many are. But it's also the interconnected. Like I'm a fan of Joseph Campbell, so when I'm looking at that, and he's got a parallel Earth type of Christianity in odds with the old gods, the elder gods, then it was a real challenge and fun for me to try and figure out the cosmology where the concept of the one God and the monotheism is in conflict with the polytheism, but both are valid in reality. And that's one of the reasons why I absolutely loved settings like Planescape, the deeper, some of the philosophical implications of that too. And that's something that was unique to the Dungeons and Dragons style medieval settings, where suddenly you have to consider, what if all these pantheons were equally real? That's kind of a fascinating concept, because most people in each culture, unless they're completely, syncretistic, they think there's one true, not true of Hinduism, of course, but that's kind of like a hobby. And so I remember when I was designing this thing, I felt like I really, really wanted to have the mythology in place before I could write about the shroud and the creatures within without having a solid foundation for how these things work in the cosmos. That was to make it unique.
Yeah. Without knowing a people's society, or societies or civilizations mythology, or history to some degree, but without knowing their mythology, you don't know how they're going to act in certain situations.
Right. And I don't rely on just the word as the trope, right? So like everyone knows there's a big difference between the Keebler elves and the Tolkien elves. And so I got to reinvent these creatures and investigate Norse myth through the sources, and that's really enjoyable research. That's a great way to create, because I'm learning at the same time. And ideas like the Holdra and trolls in this world, and how they are different from those from like D&D, which are extremely distinctive on their own. So that's really fun too.
That doesn't sound like a bad day at work when you get to read about Norse mythology and trolls and elves and things like that.
Right. So the challenge is to take all of that inspiration, with which there's much, and to put it together in a way that invites a reader to begin to look into this world and find a way to make it inviting as a story. Because if I have two books sitting in front of me and they both have a picture of a castle in a temperate zone with a green dragon on the cover, and they both well, which one is better? Well, we don't know from the cover. What makes the difference? The difference is the depth of the characters, how inviting the language is, how much thought, or I think there's a reason why people call certain things cookie cutter, right? Mm-hmm. Wanted to write a realm which invites the imagination in a way that is not pretentious or just trying to throw out bizarre ideas and concepts to say, look how different we are, but to actually show we have a living, breathing world here that's evolving. We'd like you to step in the door and take a look around.
Kind of along those lines, it is, fantasy role-playing is by far the most popular genre. And so I think it is imperative that there be some kind of differentiation between the different games. And it is interesting to hear you talk about trying to, putting those things in place into Jordenheim and making it distinct. Do you think that, how does I don't know if I'm wording this right, but how does the setting, affect the system, or the setting, or the system affect the setting? Because I know, there are, of course, GURPS and things like that where you can play, any setting with the same rules. And that's interesting. But I do think that there's something to kind of the idea where, certain systems actually kind of go along with certain settings a little bit better, or certain, systems kind of change the setting in a certain way. Do you find that that's true?
Yes. There are some things in Dungeons and Dragons world that make each one of them in some way interconnectedness. Like they have this interconnectedness through the fact that they're using the same, for the most part, same list of classes and skills. And some become far more off the beaten path, like Dark Sun was part recognizable as Dungeons and Dragons style of worlds. And it's because they have that common framework, which is one of the strengths of the OGL, things like that. And so as soon as you start to change how the system works, it starts to change narrative outcomes, say, or even how you skew the percentages and the probabilities of how the dice roll. Levels of power of starting characters. For example, in Jordenheim and Eldritch RPG and anything polyphony derived, the characters tend to be fairly powerful to start and very effective. So it doesn't have the same concept as you're starting as the plebe or one who can be blown over by additions, and then you slowly rise to power if you don't happen to get cut to pieces by goblins. You're starting out more powerful, and a lot of DMs run it that way in D&D. There's we'll stream have a fifth fifth level adventure to start. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
You can do that. But also you define things. The game system also gets to define things, and it's very powerful in the words that are used. And if there's no divine magic, that has immediate cascading effects throughout the entire concept of the world and all of the creatures and NPCs and everything else, and how they react, how they act. There's no divine magic, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be actually kind of an interesting one. And so when I'm designing, I look first and foremost to that cosmology. I want to know from the top down, what is the concept of the reality that I'm writing for. I started out with in Jordenheim I started playing Blood Bond. I just wanted to get a feel for the world, look at the stats that he came up with for the main character, talk to him about his vision and how, what inspired him and that kind of thing. And then I drastically altered my game system to reflect this. For example, his is more low magic than my Eldritch RPG, which definitely sort of swingy, wild, crazy effects, explosive. And in his, it's, more subtle than that. So without going into excruciating detail, I changed the system to reflect that. You can decide how much on the spectrum between crunch and fluff. Don't they still use those words, crunch and fluff? I guess they do.
Yeah.
And so some have read the systems that I've put together in collaboration with Randy or others and thought, wow, that's well, it can be, certainly compared to like diceless role-playing like Amber. And that's because one of the things I enjoy and one of the ways I write is with a focus on action. So yeah, it's a fast action, high stakes kind of design assumption that I'm making when I do that. And so I want to be able to answer a lot of the kind of things that come up in a more cinematic style of play. And that's what I do. But if all the focus were on negotiation or, espionage or that kind of thing, I might have put a lot more effort into social rules, actually things to try and break that down a little bit more if that was a huge part of the challenge of the game. I think we have the danger situations, the challenges. It's a GM's choice how much they want to put in place for rules for that, always. But from a design standpoint, it can be a challenging balance to reach. And I don't try and reach everyone. I don't try to appeal to everyone. I just try to appeal to those that like that particular style of play.
Okay. And, we have been talking here for a while, so I'll respect your time. Where can people learn more about the Jordenheim role-playing game?
Well, I would go to Jordenheim. That's JORDENHEIM.com. I said that with panache, right?
Yes.
You can go there, and that'll lead you on to Blood Bond and W.R.K.S games, the pencil and paper role-playing game of which I'm a part. And so that's numero uno, a place to check out, I think. You can also check out my own Facebook space, facebook.com. No one's heard of that, I know. No one's heard of that. /Eldritch RPG.
I will put links to both Jordenheim.com and to your Facebook page in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com, so that anybody who's listening can just head over there and they can check out Jordenheim and they can check out your other work that you do. So Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for humoring me and my meandering thoughts. It was fun.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dan today. As I mentioned in the episode, I have provided links to the Jordenheim RPG as well as links to some of Dan's other work. So please head over there, check those links out, and support his work. Now, if you want some free stuff, please head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You'll get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you will get an email update from me telling you what is going on in the world of Dice Geeks, as well as cool resources and links. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to support the show in some way, you can tell a friend, you can rate it, you can review it, you can share it someplace. You can also support the show on patreon.com/dicegeeks. Now, you need to come back next Wednesday because I have another amazing interview for you. So until then, keep gaming.